Women writers and feminism, like love, are found in unexpected places. In the coldest part of a London winter, Adelette Gamiani, Ted Hodgkinson, and I met Dr. Irving Finkel in front of the Queen of the Night at the British Museum. Now, Adelette runs Art Roll, some of you may know him, here in Kurdistan. And he's the organizer of this festival that we're here for at the moment, the Niniti Literature Festival. Ted programs literature for the British Council. He's another Ted. And Dr. Finkel is the keeper of the ancient Sumerian collections at the British Museum. I am the scribe. Adelette, Ted, and I were on an archaeological dig for women poets, writers, political leaders, philosopher priests, and goddesses of ancient Iraq for the Niniti Literature Festival, this festival that brings us here today in Erbil, Kurdistan, for International Women's Day 2014. Dr. Finkel has an impressive long white beard and a charming, modest manner. That afternoon, he transported us back 5,000 years to the origins of writing as a human activity. And he introduced us to the women who did it. This ancient land where we are gathered here today, between the old rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates, is the birthplace of writing and the cradle of human civilization. And it is the birthplace of the women writers who were born with it. Some 4,500 years ago, the first recorded woman poet was born here in ancient Iraq, then called Mesopotamia, Enheduanna, an Akkadian high priestess born in the city-state of Ur. Poet and scribe, she was the author of the Sumerian temple hymns. And where so much else here has been ransacked and destroyed by invasion and war, Enheduanna's poetry survives from the old Babylonian period. And this afternoon, in our festival, there will be a performance of her work, My Modern Women Poets. Niniti, it's a beautiful word, don't you think? A word that I am told is still quite common in everyday modern Kurdish, and that derives from an ancient Sumerian epithet for goddess. It means bringer of life, light, keeper of the light. And so Niniti is a fitting feminist epithet for International Women's Day in Kurdistan and Iraq. Enheduanna's traveling companions through women's writing include legendary figures whose origins are also local. They're demoness prophets, the bad, mad girls of antiquity who challenged the authority of patriarchy, who left their husbands, or who didn't have husbands at all, who tried to bring up their children in different ways. Poets, warriors, leaders of uprisings, spiritual radicals, eccentrics, and social misfits, the first feminists. Lilith, Adam's first wife who flew away and left him. Ishtar, the weapon-wielding goddess of war and freedom, unowned by any man, who wore practical loose robes so her body could move more freely. And Ereshkigal, the dark realpolitik queen of the underworld, anti-heroine of the epic Gilgamesh. Now, all of these women, real and imagined, have been with us for 5,000 years of active struggle for women to be human. Feminism, women writing, thinking, organizing, these are ancient voices. And like writing and civilization, they did not originate in the modern Western world, however much America and some of Western Europe might like to claim this to be so. This year, the United Nations chooses for its call Equality for women is progress for all. And listen carefully to the voices of history. Dust off the writing not scratched out or drowned or violated by the storm and rubble of patriarchal interventions and sexual violence, and you will hear and read the lineage of women poets and scribes, writers and fighters, pioneers, outliers, and rebel leaders who kept the fire of freedom stoked and burning for millennia. The daughters of the 19th century world inherited their tradition. And at the forefront of this continuing feminist movement were the great women trade union organizers and leaders of the Socialist International who struggled for social democracy and rights for workers and the poor and the sick, the uneducated, for women, for men, and most importantly of all, for children. And these women were the founders of International Women's Day. Over a century ago, in 1886, the great trade union leaders Eleanor Marx and Clara Zetkin together put feminism at the top of the agenda at the first Congress of the Second International in London, England. And 10 years later, just before the beginning of the 20th century, Eleanor Marx, the mother of socialist feminism, challenged a very progressive male leader who thought that social democracy could come about without fundamentally changing the structure of patriarchy. Eleanor Marx wrote, "I am, of course, as a socialist, not a representative of women's rights. It is the sex question and its economic base that I propose to discuss with you. The women's rights question, which appears to be the only one you understand, is a bourgeois idea. I propose to deal with the sex question from the point of view of the working class and the class struggle." And so, inspired by Eleanor Marx and the women's trade unions, her friend Clara Zetkin and Louise Zeitz co-founded International Women's Day, which brings us here today. Now, it's true that this was first observed in the Federated United States of America in February 1909. But make no mistake, Clara Zetkin was not American-born. She was a revolutionary exile and an immigrant. The concept and momentum for International Women's Day came firmly and solidly out of the tradition of political internationalism that had its roots in the movements and hopes and aspirations of ordinary working men and women, in trade unions, in all the ways that people organized to fight for justice and social democracy and freedom of expression. Demanding equality for women is a good start, but it is not enough. Who or what do we want to be equal to? The assumption of equal rights is a vital starting point, but it ends not very far from where it begins. Understanding the role of economics and our hearts and desires and nightmares and dreams in human society is essential to human security and happiness, and therefore to the equality of all people. People say that capitalism cannot be defeated, that it is inevitable and will always reinvent itself and survive. It is true that capitalism has no inbuilt facility to self-destruct or implode in global financial crises or under the weight of environmental disaster. But capitalism as a form of economic organization is made possible by the participation of women and children exploited within it, not as underpaid or unequally paid workers or slaves, although those things are all very important, but as bearers of children, as mothers and wives, as the maker and keeper of the family. It is the home, in the social structure of the family, in the violence of private relationships, in the fraternal wars between brother men, that women are vulnerable We idolize and forgive our fathers. We excuse our sons. We make exceptions for our husbands, and we blame our mothers and sisters. But even worse, we excuse ourselves for being good, for being charming and desirable, for behaving well, for not rebelling. This is normal, but it is not natural. Feminism begins in the heart of our relationships. Until we change how we love, how we make our children, our relationships and families, we will remain victims of ourselves and not agents of our own change and freedom of person and expression. Last year, 3 women founded a feminist journal in Kurdish to address these very questions. It's called Saartjie Baartman, Women's Era, and the founding editors include a very brilliant poet, Choman Hardy, who will be appearing in the Niniti Festival in April, amongst many other local writers. The editors hope that this publication will invigorate the women's movement in this region that they tell me is stuck in a limited cycle of political demands. The latest issue of Saartjie Baartman asks these questions. Why is demanding equal rights not enough? Why is there need for a women's liberation movement? Choman Hardy explained to me the background to this question. She said that in Kurdistan, the priority is currently to focus on campaigning for equal rights. So far, organization has not been able to go beyond this. Saartjie Baartman explores the debate and differences between the single-issue campaigns for equal rights for women and the broader need for a women's movement. It explores how a women's political organization is a necessity in order to challenge patriarchy. And these are the same questions that Eleanor Marx and Clara Zetkin posed when they thought up International Women's Day over 100 years ago. Patriarchy is the oldest, most effective global association for positive discrimination in favor of men across class and race that the world has ever known. If this is the ideal to which we aspire, then yes, demanding equality is as far as we need to go to see progress. But it is not. A system that is fundamentally based on the principle of unequal power relationships can never be balanced. It can never be equal. It cannot be made to be equal. We as women want to be equal to freedom and liberated from patriarchy. And to do this, we must get rid of it. This is why the fight for equal rights, though important, will never be enough on its own. If we only demand rights for women to be equal to men within the existing societies in which we live, we will continue to be born unfree. Feminism is the organized political force of liberation in action. It is the necessary physical movement that is required to set ourselves free. The personal risks and sacrifices are high. Danger is everywhere. But the alternative is to remain in the global prison house of patriarchy, in which we can never be equal, not equal to men, but equal to ourselves. Niniti, the goddess of life, the champion of this International Literature Festival, run by Artwell in combination with the British Council, brings together women and men and organizations of many cultures in one cause. It holds her pen in a firm grip and challenges us through art and poetry and song to go ahead together and make the world anew. Thank you.